The sterile white glare of the VIP cardiology lounge at St. Jude Memorial was suffocating, smelling faintly of rubbing alcohol and cheap, institutional lavender. At 72, Peter sat unmoving on the faux leather sofa, his large, calloused hands resting heavily on his knees. He wore an old, faded flannel shirt that had seen too many winters, a stark contrast to the immaculate Italian leather shoes worn by his son, Jason, who was currently pacing the linoleum floor like a caged predator. "You've lost your goddamn mind, Dad," Jason hissed, keeping his voice dangerously low, though his face was flushed a violent, mottled red. "Look at her. Just look at her. She's younger than I am. This is textbook elder abuse. It's a calculated, predatory shakedown, and you're walking right into it like a lamb to the slaughter." Across the room, sitting on the edge of a plastic chair, Mary kept her head down. Her shoulders were trembling under a worn denim jacket. She looked incredibly small, her fingers tightly interlaced over her lap, resting just above the slight, barely noticeable curve of her abdomen. She didn't defend herself. She didn't look up. The crushing weight of 1,000 secrets seemed to hold her chin firmly against her chest. "That's enough, Jason," Peter said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the heavy, resonant gravity of a man who had built a real estate empire from a single toolbox and a second mortgage 50 years ago. He didn't look at his son. His eyes, clouded slightly by age but intensely sharp, were fixed on Mary's trembling hands. "Enough? Are you kidding me?" Chloe, Jason's wife, stepped forward, her manicured nails clicking sharply against her designer handbag. Her voice cut through the room like shattered glass. "Peter, we brought Mary into your home because we cared about you. We thought you needed a housekeeper, someone to make sure you were taking your medication, someone to keep an eye on you after the scare last winter. And how does she repay our family? She gets herself knocked up by a man who belongs in an assisted living facility." I said, "Enough," Peter repeated, his knuckles whitening against his denim jeans. The monitors in the hallway beeped rhythmically, a mocking soundtrack to the disintegration of a family. "No, it's not enough," Jason snapped, stepping directly into Peter's line of sight, blocking his view of Mary. "We are fixing this. Right now. I've already called Detective Vance. We're filing a formal report for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. And you," Jason spun around, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Mary's face. "You have exactly 10 seconds to pack whatever dignity you have left and walk out that door before security drags you out in handcuffs. You're done, Mary. The grift is over." Mary flinched, a sharp, ragged sob escaping her throat. She instinctively pulled her knees closer together, shrinking into herself. The heavy oak door of the lounge swung open, and Dr. Harrison walked in, holding a sleek gray tablet. The ambient noise of the hospital surged in behind him for a brief second before the door clicked shut. The physician looked at the rigid, fractured geometry of the room and immediately sighed, recognizing the suffocating tension of a wealthy family tearing itself apart over an inheritance. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Harrison said gently, addressing Peter, "the second round of lab work is back. Your cardiac enzymes are stable, and the EKG shows no new arrhythmias. The acute episode has passed. It was a severe, stress-induced panic attack, mimicking an angina episode, but your heart muscle is undamaged. However, your blood pressure is still dangerously elevated at 165/95. You need absolute rest. No stress. No shouting." "He wouldn't be stressed if this parasite wasn't trying to bleed him dry, Doctor," Jason barked, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "We need him discharged immediately so we can take him home and handle this family emergency privately." "Jason, sit down," Peter ordered, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a terrifying stillness. "I won't sit down, Dad. I'm protecting you." Jason's voice cracked, a mixture of genuine panic and financial desperation bleeding through his polished exterior. "She lied to you from day one. Do you even know who she is? Do you know what she owes? She's drowning in debt, Dad. Hundreds of thousands from her mother's cancer treatments. She didn't come to cook your meals because she liked your company. She came because Jason caught himself, his jaw locking instantly as he realized the massive, gaping edge of the cliff he had almost walked over. Peter slowly raised his head, his gaze locked onto his son's eyes, peeling back the layers of performance, searching the face of the boy he had raised, the boy he had given everything to, and finding only a hollow, terrifying greed. "Because you what, Jason?" Peter asked softly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rhythmic beeping from the hallway seemed to fade into the background. Jason opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Chloe, whose face had gone completely pale, her fingers clutching her Chanel bag so tightly the leather groaned. In that suffocating silence, Mary finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red, swollen, and swimming with a profound, agonizing guilt that ran deeper than any fear of the police. She looked at Peter, not with the calculating gaze of a con artist caught in the act, but with the raw, broken sorrow of someone who had found a savior and accidentally destroyed him. "I'm sorry, Peter," Mary whispered, her voice barely a threat. "I'm so sorry. Don't speak to him," Chloe yelled, taking a step toward Mary, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor. "Don't you dare play the victim now." Before Chloe could reach her, Peter stood up. He didn't rise with the agility of a young man, but with a slow, deliberate, monumental effort that commanded the entire room. He ignored his son. He walked right past Chloe, his heavy boots thudding against the floor, until he stood directly in front of Mary. Jason watched, his breath catching in his throat, expecting his father to finally snap, expecting the proud, stubborn old patriarch to unleash his legendary wrath on the woman who had deceived them all. Instead, Peter sank heavily onto his old knees, lowering himself until he was at eye level with Mary. His joints popped painfully in the quiet room. He reached out with both of his massive, weathered hands and gently wrapped them around Mary's cold, trembling fingers. "Are you okay?" Peter asked her softly, his voice thick with an emotion that had nothing to do with anger. "The baby. Are you both okay?" Mary choked back another sob, nodding frantically as fresh tears spilled over her cheeks. She squeezed his hands back, clinging to him like a lifeline in a storm. Jason staggered back a step, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "Dad, what are you doing? She's a criminal. She targeted you. We have the proof." Peter didn't look back at his son. He remained on his knees, holding the hand of the 32-year-old woman who carried his child, his back turned completely to the life he had built, and the son he no longer recognized. "I know exactly what she did, Jason," Peter said, his voice flat, cold, and final. "And I know exactly what you did. Now get out of my room." 3 months before the sterile walls of St. Jude Memorial became a battleground, the quiet luxury of Peter's suburban estate in Oak Ridge felt more like a beautifully preserved museum than a home. The house was a custom-built, 5-bedroom craftsman, boasting wraparound porches, hand-carved mahogany crown molding, and sweeping views of a private lake. It was the crowning achievement of Peter's 40-year career as a master builder and real estate developer. But since Martha, his wife of nearly 50 years, had passed away from a sudden stroke, the house had grown overwhelmingly large, echoing with a deafening, hollow silence. Peter adjusted his reading glasses, staring at the kitchen table. Spread out before him were 3 separate blueprints for an affordable housing complex he was planning to fund in the inner city. He had the money, more than enough to live out 3 lifetimes, but he lacked the energy. At 72, his arthritis made unrolling the heavy vellum paper a chore, and his heart just wasn't in the math anymore. The front door clicked open, breaking the stillness. Jason and Chloe walked in without knocking, their voices carrying that high-frequency, frenetic energy that always made Peter's chest tighten. "Dad, you're still sitting in the dark," Jason said, flipping on the overhead recessed lighting, instantly washing away the warm twilight Peter had been enjoying. Jason was 38, dressed in a tailored navy suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, looking every bit the high-end venture capitalist he claimed to be. "I told you, you need to keep the lights on. It's a depression risk." "I like the dusk, Jason. It lets me think," Peter said mildly, taking off his glasses. Chloe stepped forward, placing a sleek, white pastry box from an expensive boutique bakery on the granite island. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater, her diamonds catching the harsh LED light. "We brought you those lemon tarts you like, Peter. But more importantly, we solved your problem." Peter raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know I had a problem." "Oh, come on, Dad," Jason said, sitting across from him and aggressively pushing the blueprints aside to make room for his forearms. "Look at this place. dust on the mantle. The fridge is practically empty except for stale milk and leftover takeout. You had a dizzy spell last month at the hardware store. You can't keep living like a hermit. You need a live-in house manager. Someone to cook, clean, manage your schedule, and make sure you're taking your beta blockers. Peter sighed, a deep, weary sound. I've told you twice, Jason. I don't want a stranger roaming around my house, touching Martha's things. I can take care of myself. She's not a stranger, Chloe interjected smoothly, leaning against the counter. Well, not to us. Her name is Mary. She's a childhood friend of mine. Her family went through a really rough patch. Her mother passed away from pancreatic cancer last year, and Mary spent every dime she had on experimental treatments. She's incredibly neat, quiet, and honestly, she needs the work. She has a degree in hospitality administration. She's overqualified, but she needs a stable environment. We thought of you immediately. Peter looked from Chloe to Jason. For a fleeting second, a pang of warmth touched his chest. He thought his son was finally looking out for him, showing the kind of familial empathy that had been missing since Martha's funeral. She's trustworthy? Peter asked, his voice softening. With our lives, Dad, Jason said, his voice ringing with a practiced, earnest sincerity. She just wants a quiet place to rebuild her life. And you need someone to make sure you don't fall down the stairs and lie there for 3 days. It's a win-win. What Peter couldn't see, what his aging, grief-weary eyes failed to register, was the subtle, lightning-fast glance exchanged between Jason and Chloe, a micro-expression of absolute triumph. 2 hours later, inside a dimly lit, upscale cocktail lounge downtown, that triumph broke out into the open. Jason ordered a double scotch, his hands trembling slightly, not from excitement, but from the crushing weight of a looming financial avalanche. He bit, Jason whispered, leaning across the small candle-lit table toward Chloe and Mary. Mary sat rigidly in the leather booth. She looked exhausted. Dark circles hollowed her eyes, and her skin possessed a translucent, sickly pallor born of sleepless nights and relentless stress. She was staring at a glass of ice water, her fingers tightly gripped around the condensation. I don't like this, Chloe, Mary said, her voice shaking. You told me it was just a housekeeping job. You told me your father-in-law was getting frail. But the way Jason is talking, it sounds like espionage. It's not espionage, Mary. Don't be dramatic, Chloe scoffed, taking a delicate sip of her martini. It's asset protection. Peter is 72. He's pouring millions into these ridiculous charity projects. Last week he talked about liquidating a commercial property in downtown Seattle to fund a community center. That property is supposed to be Jason's inheritance. It's our future. He's losing his cognitive faculties, Mary. Jason lied smoothly, his eyes narrowing as he turned on his professional charm. He's paranoid. He forgets his medication. He's a danger to his own estate. If he liquidates that property, the tax penalties alone will destroy the family trust. We just need you to be our eyes and ears inside that house. By doing what? Mary asked, her throat tight. You just do the job, Jason explained, tapping his fingers on the table to emphasize his points. You cook, you clean, you handle his mail. But you keep a detailed log. Every time he forgets a name, every time he leaves the stove on, every time he misplaces his keys or throws a tantrum, you document it. Photograph his unorganized financial files. If he speaks incoherently, record it on your phone. We need a mountain of concrete, undeniable evidence of mental incompetence so we can file for a legal conservatorship. We need to take power of attorney before he signs away the family legacy to a bunch of strangers. It feels illegal, Mary whispered, her chest heaving. He's your father, Jason, and I'm protecting him from himself. Jason snapped, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. And let's not forget who is protecting you, Mary. You owe the collection agencies $210,000. Your mother's estate is tied up in a probate nightmare. They're threatening to garnish your wages and repossess your car by the end of the month. You're 1 week away from being homeless. Chloe reached over, covering Mary's cold hand with her own, her smile dripping with toxic benevolence. Mary, look at me. We're offering you $4,000 a month, cash under the table, plus free room and board in a luxury home. All you have to do is keep a diary of an old man's mistakes. When the court grants Jason the power of attorney, we'll give you a $50,000 bonus. Your debt will be wiped out. You can breathe again. Don't you want to stop running from the banks? Mary looked at Chloe, the girl she had gone to high school with, the girl who had always had everything. Then she thought of the stack of past due notices sitting on her kitchen counter, the relentless, predatory phone calls from debt collectors that woke her up at 6 a.m. every single morning. She thought of her mother, who had died in pain, leaving behind a legacy of nothing but medical bills. Desperation is a quiet, suffocating room. It shrinks a person's morality until the only thing that matters is survival. He doesn't have a temper, does he? Mary asked, her voice cracking as she finally surrendered. He won't be abusive? Jason smiled, a cold, satisfied expression that didn't reach his eyes. He raised his scotch glass in a silent toast. No, Mary. He's a soft touch. An old, lonely contractor who misses his wife. He'll be putty in your hands. The next Monday morning, a battered gray sedan pulled up the long, winding driveway of the Oak Ridge estate. Mary gripped the steering wheel, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the beautiful craftsman house, its large windows reflecting the bright morning sun, feeling entirely like a thief preparing to breach a sanctuary. She got out of the car, smoothing down her sensible khaki trousers and a plain white polo shirt. Taking a deep breath to steady her shaking hands, she walked up the stone steps and rang the doorbell. The heavy oak door opened. Peter stood there, towering over her, his broad shoulders slightly hunched with age. He wasn't wearing a tycoon suit. He wore an old flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms lined with thick veins and old scars from construction sites. Mary braced herself for a cold, authoritative interview, the kind she had prepared for with wealthy clients during her hospitality training. Instead, Peter looked at her small suitcase, looked at her pale, anxious face, and his expression softened into a warm, crinkling smile that made the lines around his eyes deepen. He stepped aside, opening the door wide to the sunlit foyer. "You must be Mary," Peter said, his voice deep, gentle, and utterly devoid of suspicion. "Come on and out of the heat, young lady. Welcome to my home." The first 3 weeks inside the Oak Ridge estate felt to Mary like living inside a slowly tightening vice. Every night, after Peter went to bed, she sat at the small desk in her ground-floor bedroom, her fingers hovering over the keyboard of her laptop. Her phone would buzz relentlessly on the mattress beside her. Text messages from Chloe demanding updates. Asterisk, did he forget anything today? Did you check his trash for unshredded bank statements? Did he take his pills on time? Asterisk. Mary would look at the screen, her stomach churning with a cold, greasy layer of guilt, before typing out her daily log. Asterisk, October 14th. Peter spent 40 minutes looking for his reading glasses. They were on the workbench in the garage. Documented. Asterisk. Asterisk, October 16th. Peter forgot to turn off the coffee maker before leaving for a short walk. Documented. Asterisk. She felt like a vulture hovering over a majestic, dying animal, waiting for a stumble. But the reality inside the house stubbornly refused to match the narrative Jason and Chloe were desperate to construct. Peter wasn't a tyrannical, failing tycoon losing his mind. He was simply a lonely man carrying a quiet, monumental grief. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., Mary would walk into the kitchen to find Peter already up. He never waited for her to serve him. Instead, he would have a pot of black coffee brewing, sitting quietly at the kitchen island with a worn, leather-bound notebook, sketching out dimensions for the affordable housing project. "Good morning, Mary," he would say, his voice deep and steady, always pushing a fresh mug of coffee toward her. "Did you sleep all right? The house gets a bit drafty near the east wing." "I slept fine, Mr. Vance." "Thank you," she would reply, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet the genuine kindness in his gaze. She would immediately bust herself with work, scrubbing counters that were already clean, vacuuming rugs that didn't have a speck of dust, using the physical labor as a shield to keep him at a distance. But Peter was a builder. He noticed structure, and he noticed when things were structurally unsound, including people. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the sky over Oak Ridge turned a heavy, bruised purple. Mary was in the formal dining room, polishing a silver tea set that had belonged to Peter's late wife, Martha. The house was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the large picture windows. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a notification from her banking app, asterisk alert, account overdrawn. Overdraft fee applied, asterisk. Mary stopped polishing. A cold numbness spread from her fingertips up her arms. She pulled out her phone, staring at the negative balance. The collection agency had hit her checking account with an automated legal levy she hadn't anticipated. Her chest tightened, the air suddenly turning to glass in her lungs. She couldn't breathe. The $4,000 cash Jason had given her for the first month was already gone, swallowed whole by her mother's lingering funeral costs and outstanding pharmacy bills. She was drowning, and the water was rising faster than she could pump it out. She leaned against the heavy mahogany dining table, her forehead pressing against the cool, polished wood, her shoulders shaking as a silent, suffocating sob tore through her chest. She felt completely degraded, a spy in a house of a man who had done her no harm, and she was still failing to save herself. Mary. The voice was soft, but it made her gasp, her head snapping up. Peter was standing in the doorway, wearing an old canvas work apron over his flannel shirt. He held a small wooden birdhouse he had been repairing in the garage. Mary quickly wiped her face with the sleeve of her polo shirt, turning away from him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance. I didn't hear you come in. I'll have dinner ready in an hour." Peter didn't leave. He set the birdhouse down on a side table and walked into the dining room, his heavy boots making no sound on the thick Persian rug. He stopped a respectful 3 feet away from her. He didn't invade her space, but his presence was a grounding weight in the room. "You're crying, child," Peter said gently. I have a bit of a headache." "The weather," Mary lied, her voice cracking on the final syllable. Peter looked at her for a long, silent moment. His eyes weren't the foggy, confused eyes of a senile old man. They were sharp, deeply intuitive, filled with the wisdom of a man who had spent 50 years managing rough construction crews and recognizing when a worker was at their breaking point. "My Martha used to polish that silver when she was worried," Peter said softly, his gaze drifting to the tea set. She said focusing on making something bright again helped clear the fog in her own mind. "But silver doesn't cry. People do." Mary swallowed hard, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the polishing cloth. "I'm fine, Mr. Vance. Really. Jason tells me things, Mary." Peter continued, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a profound, weary sadness. "He thinks I don't listen, but I do. He told me about your mother. He told me how you stayed by her bedside for 6 months at the clinic, how you took care of her bills until the end." Mary's heart stopped. She looked up at him, fear flashing in her eyes. Did he know? Did he know why she was really here? But Peter's face held only an overwhelming empathy. "That's a heavy cross for a young woman to carry alone," he said, his hand resting gently on the back of a dining chair. "A lot of young people would have run away from that kind of debt, that kind of pain. But you stayed. You fought for her. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of soul you have." The words felt like a physical blow to Mary's chest. Every syllable of praise from his mouth was a hot iron against her conscience. He thought she was noble. He thought she was a devoted daughter. He had no idea she was currently building a legal guillotine to drop on his neck. Please don't say that, Mr. Vance," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "You don't know me. I know a good worker when I see one, and I know a good heart when I meet one," Peter said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. He reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a small, neatly folded piece of paper, setting it down on the table next to the silver polish. Mary looked down. It was a personal check, written in Peter's thick, steady handwriting. It was made out to her for $10,000. In the memo line, he had simply written, *advance for future services. Stay strong, *. "Mr. Vance, I can't take this," Mary said, stepping back as if the paper were radioactive. "Jason pays me. This is too much. I haven't done anything to earn this." "Jason pays you to clean my floors," Peter said firmly, his eyes locking onto hers with absolute clarity. "I am paying you to look after this house, and looking after this house means looking after the people in it. You're drowning, Mary. I can see it. A builder knows when a foundation is slipping. Take the money. Clear your head. I don't want a ghost walking around my kitchen. Why are you doing this?" Mary cried out, the frustration and guilt finally breaking through her professional facade. "I'm a stranger. You've only known me for 3 weeks." Peter looked around the massive, empty dining room, the shadows elongating as the rain continued to pour outside. "Because since Martha died, This house has been a graveyard, Peter said, his voice cracking with a sudden, raw vulnerability that stripped away his imposing stature. Jason is my son, and I love him. But when he looks at me, he doesn't see a father anymore. He sees an old ledger. He sees numbers, properties, investments. He's always in a hurry to get to the next meeting, the next deal. He hasn't asked me how I'm feeling since the funeral. He looked back at Mary, his eyes glistening slightly in the dim light. The other day, when I forgot where I put my keys, you didn't sigh. You didn't roll your eyes like Jason does. You just helped me look for them, and then you made me a cup of tea. You treat me like a man, Mary. Not a diagnosis. Not a payday. To an old man, that's worth a lot more than $10,000. Mary stood frozen. Every word Peter spoke was a truth that completely shattered the lies Jason had fed her. Peter wasn't incompetent. He was neglected. He wasn't losing his mind. He was starved for basic human decency. And the only reason she had been patient with him was because she was documenting his mistakes for money. The checks sat on the table between them, a lifeline from the very man she was supposed to destroy. Go on. Take it, Peter said gently, giving the table a small tap. Go to the bank before it closes. Get some dinner that doesn't come out of a microwave. We'll start fresh tomorrow. He turned and walked slowly back toward the garage, his boots thudding softly, leaving Mary alone in the darkening dining room. She looked at the check. Then she looked at her phone, which was vibrating again. A text from Chloe. Asterisk, did he take his 4 p.m. blood pressure reading? Send the photo. Asterisk. Mary didn't reply to Chloe. She slowly picked up the check, her fingers trembling so hard she nearly tore the paper. For the first time in 3 weeks, she didn't open her laptop that night to log his mistakes. Instead, she sat in the dark, staring out at the rain, realizing that she wasn't just a thief anymore. She was a monster if she went through with this. By the first week of November, the atmosphere inside the Oak Ridge estate had shifted into a cold, dangerous kind of tactical warfare. Jason's financial desperation had reached a boiling point. The venture capital firm he managed was bleeding liquidity after a series of aggressive, highly leveraged tech investments cratered. He needed Peter's Seattle commercial portfolio liquidated immediately to cover his margins, but Peter remained stubbornly focused on his community housing projects. Because Mary had stopped sending her daily logs, Jason and Chloe began showing up at the house unannounced, their smiles sharper, their patience entirely gone. You're slacking, Mary, Jason hissed, cornering her in the pantry while Peter was upstairs resting. Jason's eyes were bloodshot, his expensive suit jacket unbuttoned, revealing a sweat-stained collar. We're paying you $4,000 a month. Chloe tells me you haven't uploaded a single report to the shared drive in over 10 days. What the hell are you doing all day? Mary kept her back to him, systematically stacking cans of organic chicken broth on the shelf. Her hands were steady, tempered by a cold, protective rage she hadn't known she possessed until recently. He hasn't been forgetting things, Jason. He's been taking his medication on time. There's nothing to report. Don't give me that garbage. Jason whispered aggressively, stepping closer, invading her space until she could smell the stale espresso and anxiety on his breath. He's 72. He's failing. If he isn't making mistakes, you need to look harder. Or better yet, help him make them. Mary froze, a can of broth heavy in her palm. She slowly turned her head to look at him. What does that mean? Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, amber prescription bottle with a blank label. He placed it firmly on the shelf between them. It's a mild, fast-acting sedative. Completely safe, standard prescription for anxiety. If he takes one with his afternoon tea, he'll be groggy, slightly disoriented, and lethargic within 30 minutes. The state financial assessors are coming on Thursday to review his competency for the new housing trust he's trying to establish. If he's out of it during that interview, the assessment fails automatically. We get our temporary guardianship, and you get your $50,000 bonus. Mary stared at the little plastic bottle. It looked incredibly small, yet it carried the weight of an absolute moral execution. You want me to drug your father. I want you to help me save this family from his erratic behavior, Jason corrected, his voice hardening into stone. Don't get righteous on me now, Mary. You cashed our checks. You're already deep in this mud with us. If I go down, the first thing I do is file a lawsuit against you for taking money under false pretenses. I will make sure you spend the next 5 years in a courtroom. Put it in his tea on Thursday. Don't blow this. He turned and walked out of the pantry, leaving the ambient hum of the refrigerator to fill the suffocating silence. Mary reached out, her fingers cold as ice, and picked up the amber bottle. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so violently she felt physically sick. She walked out to the backyard porch, needing air, her chest tight. She found Peter sitting on the wooden steps, wearing his grease-stained canvas work apron, a piece of sandpaper in his hand. He was meticulously smoothing down the edges of a miniature wooden rocking chair, a replica of the one he had built for Jason when he was a toddler. "The wood has memory, Mary," Peter said without looking up, his voice a calm, rhythmic contrast to the storm in her mind. "If you rush it, if you force the grain against its natural path, it splinters. You have to listen to the material. You have to respect it." Mary sat down 2 steps above him, her knees pulled tight against her chest. She looked at the back of his gray head, at the thick, protective slope of his shoulders. The $10,000 check he had given her 2 weeks ago had saved her. Her bank account was in the black. The collectors had stopped calling her at dawn, and for the first time in 2 years, she could sleep without a knot in her stomach. He had given her her life back, and in return, his son had just handed her a bottle of poison to destroy his. "Mr. Vance." "Peter," Mary said, her voice barely audible over the rustle of the dry autumn leaves in the yard. Peter stopped sanding. He blew the fine white sawdust off the small chair and turned his head to look up at her. "What is it, child? You look like you've seen a ghost. Why did you name your son Jason?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What was he like when he was a boy?" Peter's eyes softened, a distant, beautiful light reflecting in them as he leaned back against the porch railing. "Ah, Jace. He was a fireball. Smartest kid in the county. When he was 7, he used to follow me around the construction sites with a tiny plastic tool belt. He'd pick up the drop nails and sort them by size. He was so proud of being helpful. I used to think he'd take over the company, build skyscrapers, do things I never had the education to do." He let out a long, quiet sigh, the smile fading into a poignant, heavy sadness. "But when he went off to college, the money changed him. The city changed him. He started looking at the world like it was a game to be won, rather than something to be built. He forgot how it felt to have dirt under his fingernails. He forgot that the most important thing a man can build isn't a portfolio. It's a reputation for honesty." He reached up, his large, rough hand gently tapping Mary's shoe. "Don't ever lose your honesty, Mary. It's the only asset the banks can't take from you when you go bankrupt. It's the only thing you take to the grave." Mary choked back a sob, turning her face away so he wouldn't see the tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. She had the amber bottle gripped tightly inside her jacket pocket, its sharp plastic edges digging into her palm like a physical manifestation of her own corruption. Wednesday night, the eve of the financial assessment, the tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Peter spent the evening in his study, frantically organizing his old architectural drawings and land deeds, wanting to prove to the state assessors that his mind was as sharp as it had been 30 years ago. The stress was taking a visible toll on him. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, and he kept rubbing his left shoulder, dismissing it as a flare-up of his old bursitis. Mary stood in the kitchen at 9 p.m., preparing his evening chamomile tea. The amber bottle sat on the granite counter beside the porcelain mug. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jason, *, tomorrow is the day. Don't forget the tea. The bonus is waiting for you. *. Mary stared at the phone, then at the bottle, then at the steaming kettle. Her hands shook so violently she spilled hot water across the counter. The weight of the deception was crushing her from the inside out. If she didn't do it, Jason would ruin her. If she did it, she would destroy the only man who had shown her unconditional grace since her mother died. She picked up the amber bottle, walked over to the kitchen sink, and twisted the cap off. With a sudden, decisive strike of her thumb, she dumped the entire contents of the bottle down the garbage disposal, flipping the switch and letting the roaring blade grind the white pills into chemical dust before washing it away with cold water. "I won't do it," she whispered into the empty kitchen, her chest heaving as a profound, liberating relief washed over her. "I'm done." She poured the clean, unadulterated tea into the mug and walked down the hallway toward Peter's study. As she approached the half-open oak door, she heard a strange, ragged gasp. Mary accelerated her pace, pushing the door wide open. The porcelain mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor as the hot amber liquid splashed across the room. Peter was slumped sideways over his mahogany desk, his face contorted in agony, his left hand clutching his chest. His breath was coming in terrible, wet, desperate wheezes, his eyes wide and clouded with panic as he looked up at her, unable to form a word. "Peter!" Mary screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. She reached for his wrist. His pulse was dangerously fast, erratic, fluttering like a trapped insect under his cool, clammy skin. He was having a major, stress-induced cardiovascular crisis. She didn't hesitate. She didn't call Jason. She didn't think about the assessment, the money, or the trap that had been set for him. Her hospitality training and instincts took over. She grabbed his phone, dialed 911, and shouted her address to the operator while loosening Peter's flannel collar. "Stay with me, Peter. Look at me," Mary commanded, her voice fierce, stripping away her quiet housekeeper persona. She took his large, cold hand and pressed it against her own chest. "Breathe with me. In and out. The ambulance is coming. Don't leave me here alone. Breathe." Peter stared into her eyes, his fingers tightening around hers with a desperate, terrifying strength. In that dark, terrifying valley between life and death, the artificial boundaries of their relationship, master and servant, old tycoon and indebted spy, were utterly incinerated. There were only two souls left in the room, clinging to each other for survival. The sirens had faded into the background noise of St. Jude Memorial Hospital, but the sterile, green-tinted fluorescent lights of room 412 felt like a permanent twilight. It was 3 a.m. The initial chaos of the emergency room had cleared, replaced by the low, rhythmic hum of a heart monitor and the steady drip of an IV-line. Peter lay in the elevated hospital bed, looking older and more fragile than Mary had ever seen him. The broad shoulders that had carried beams and blueprints for decades seemed slightly sunk into the stiff, white linens. An oxygen cannula rested beneath his nose, his breathing shallow but regular. His skin, though still pale, had lost that terrifying, translucent gray hue from the study floor. Mary hadn't moved from the rigid plastic chair beside his bed for 4 hours. She still wore her flour-smudged apron over her polo shirt, her fingers tightly interwoven with Peter's large, calloused right hand. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed with red, staring at the green line spiking across the heart monitor screen. Every beep was a tiny, fragile miracle. The heavy door creaked open, and Dr. Harrison stepped into the room, tapping a gray tablet. He glanced at Mary, noting the fierce, protective way she held the old man's hand, before looking up at the monitors. "He's stabilizing," Dr. Harrison said softly, his voice a comforting murmur in the quiet room. "The nitroglycerin drip did its job, and the lab work confirms it wasn't a full myocardial infarction. It was a severe case of stress-induced cardiomyopathy, Takotsubo, what people colloquially call broken heart syndrome. His heart muscle was literally overwhelmed by an acute surge of stress hormones. If you hadn't called 911 when you did, miss, the arrhythmia could have been fatal within minutes." Mary let out a ragged, trembling breath, her shoulders collapsing slightly as the tension broke. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you. He needs absolute quiet for the next 48 hours. No excitement. No visitors except family," the doctor added, giving Mary a reassuring nod before stepping back out into the hallway. The silence returned, heavier now, filled with a suffocating truth. Stress-induced. Mary looked at Peter's face, her heart aching with a profound, agonizing guilt. She knew exactly what had caused that stress. It wasn't just the upcoming financial assessment. It was the relentless, invisible pressure of a son who looked at his father as an obstacle to be cleared, and her own role as the silent, Judas-like observer in his home. As if sensing the shift in the room, Peter's eyelids fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused for a second before centering entirely on Mary. He didn't look at the room or the 4 lines. He just looked at her. "Mary," he whispered, his voice gravelly and dry. "I'm here, Peter. Don't try to move," she said quickly, leaning forward, using her free hand to smooth the gray hair away from his forehead. "You're in the hospital. You're safe. The doctors fixed everything." Peter managed a small, weak smile, his fingers twitching against hers, tightening their grip. "I remember the floor. I remember you telling me to breathe. You didn't leave. I would never leave you, Mary said. And as the words left her mouth, she realized with terrifying clarity that it was the absolute truth. She didn't care about the $50,000 bonus anymore. She didn't care about Jason's threats. She cared about the survival of this lonely, beautiful man who had treated her with more dignity than anyone else in her life. Peter closed his eyes for a long moment, a single tear escaping the corner of his eye and dampening his silver sideburn. Jason, did he come? Mary's throat constricted. I called him from the ambulance, Peter. He said he was in the middle of a dinner with his investors. He said he'd come first thing in the morning. A heavy, devastating silence fell over the bed. Peter didn't open his eyes, but his jaw clenched slightly. He wasn't stupid. He had built an empire by reading between the lines of contracts, and he could read the absence of his son perfectly. He was completely alone, saved by a woman he had hired 3 weeks ago. The night deepened. By 4:30 a.m., Peter had fallen into a deep, medicated sleep. Mary rested her head against the edge of the mattress, her hands still locked in his, exhaustion finally pulling her under. It was the sudden, aggressive click of the door handle that jolted her awake at 6 a.m. Jason and Chloe walked into the room. Jason hadn't even changed his clothes. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, but his face wasn't filled with relief or worry. It was tight, defensive, and furious. Chloe followed closely behind, her arms crossed tightly over her designer coat, looking around the room as if she were inspecting a low-grade hotel. What the hell happened, Mary? Jason whispered sharply, stepping up to the opposite side of the bed, completely ignoring his sleeping father. The assessment was supposed to be in 3 hours. Do you know what a medical emergency does to our timeline? It pushes everything back by months. The court won't touch a guardianship case while he's in an acute cardiac ward. Mary slowly stood up from her chair. She didn't let go of Peter's hand immediately, but as she faced Jason, something inside her snapped. The quiet, timid woman who had been terrified of debt collectors vanished. He almost died, Jason, Mary said, her voice dropping into a cold, dangerous whisper that made Chloe blink in surprise. His heart almost stopped. And you're worried about a court date? Don't get high and mighty with us, Mary, Chloe interjected, stepping forward, her eyes narrowing. Did you give him the tea or not? Jason said you were supposed to handle it yesterday afternoon. Did you overdose him? Is that why he's here? Mary looked at Chloe, seeing the complete absence of human empathy in her childhood friend's eyes. I didn't give him anything. I threw your pills down the drain, Chloe. And the only reason Peter is in this bed is because the two of you have been suffocating him with your greed until his heart literally couldn't take the pressure anymore. Jason's face turned a violent, dark red. He stepped across the width of the bed, his shadow falling over Mary, his fingers trembling with rage. You listening to me, you little bitch? You're a hired hand. You're an indicted, bankrupt nobody we brought in out of charity. You do what we tell you to do, or I will make sure the police are waiting for you at your apartment by noon. You think you can turn on us? She isn't turning on anyone, Jason. The voice was low, weak, but it carried the absolute authority of a judge pronouncing a sentence. Jason froze. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Peter was awake. His eyes were wide open, staring directly up at his son with a terrifying, absolute clarity. He had heard every single word. The silence that followed Peter's voice was deafening, heavy with the weight of an execution. Jason's hand remained suspended in the air, his fingers still curled in a menacing gesture toward Mary. The violent red on his face drained instantly, leaving him a sickly, hollow pale. He looked down at his father, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, before a desperate, frantic smile plastered itself onto his face. Dad, Jason stammered, his voice cracking as he took a hasty step back. Dad, you're awake. Thank God. You misunderstood. We were just stressed. Mary wasn't doing her job, and we were just trying to. I heard you, Jason, Peter said. His voice was barely above a whisper, raspy from the oxygen cannula, but it held a monumental stillness that froze the entire room. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. The betrayal was too deep for anger. It had reached the bone. I heard every word. The logs, the files, the pills. Chloe backed away toward the door, her Chanel bag clutched against her chest like a shield. Peter, please. Jason was just worried about your investments. There are people taking advantage of you. We did this out of love. Love. Peter turned his head slowly, looking at his daughter-in-law. His clouded eyes were piercingly sharp. You brought a desperate woman into my house to build a cage for me. You wanted to trap me in my own mind so you could pick my pockets while I was still breathing. That isn't love, Chloe. That's a slow murder. Dad, listen to me. Jason desperately lunged forward, grabbing the chrome railing of the hospital bed. You're not seeing the big picture. The firm is in trouble. If we don't liquidate the Seattle portfolio, we lose everything. I'm your son, your own flesh and blood. You're going to let a stranger destroy us. The only person who destroyed you, Jason, is the man staring back at you in the mirror, Peter said softly. He looked at his son, the boy he had given a miniature tool belt to, the boy he had worked 80-hour weeks to send to Ivy League schools, and felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. You forgot how to build. You only know how to take. Peter turned his gaze back to Mary, who was standing at the foot of the bed, her face wet with tears, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. Mary, Peter said gently, extending his right hand toward her. Mary hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping forward and wrapping her hands around his. 6 weeks ago, Mary confessed everything to me, Peter said, his eyes locking onto Jason's horrified stare. The revelation hit Jason like a physical blow. He staggered back. What? She sat at my kitchen table, crying, and she handed me the first month's cash you gave her, Peter explained, a faint, proud smile touching his lips. She told me about her debt. She told me about the diary you made her keep. She couldn't do it because she has something you and Chloe traded away a long time ago, a conscience. You knew, Jason whispered, his voice trembling as his entire plan disintegrated into ash beneath his feet. I knew, Peter said, and that's why, 3 weeks ago, I met with my estate attorneys. The Seattle portfolio has already been transferred into an irrevocable charitable trust for the inner-city housing project. It's gone, Jason. You can't touch a dime of it. Jason let out a raw, choked sound, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated financial panic. You ruined us. You gave away my birthright. Your birthright was my respect, and you squandered it, Peter replied, his voice hardening into finality. And there's one more thing you should know. Mary isn't a stranger anymore. She is my wife. We were legally married at the county courthouse last Friday. Chloe let out a sharp, horrified gasp. Jason stared at Mary, his gaze dropping to her abdomen, realization dawning on him like a nightmare. She's carrying my child, Peter said, his hand squeezing Mary's tightly. A new life, a new family, one that doesn't look at me like a target. Now, Jason, Chloe, I want you to leave this room. If you ever set foot on my property or try to contact us again, I will have Detective Vance enforce the restraining order my lawyers have already drafted. You're done. Jason opened his mouth to scream, to curse, to fight, but the utter, absolute authority in his father's eyes broke him completely. He turned, his expensive leather shoes scuffing loudly against the linoleum, and stormed out of the room. Chloe hurried after him, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. The room returned to silence. The heart monitor beeped rhythmically, steady and calm. Peter closed his eyes, a deep, exhausted sigh escaping his chest, before looking up at Mary. It's over, Mary, he whispered gently. We're free. 1 year later, the wraparound porch of the Oak Ridge estate no longer echoed with a deafening, hollow silence. Instead, the warm June breeze carried the soft, melodic creak of a wooden rocking chair and the faint, rhythmic cooing of a healthy 3-month-old baby boy. Peter sat in the chair he had meticulously sanded and repaired himself, his large, weathered hand gently cupping the back of little Martha's head. At 73, Peter looked younger than he had in a decade. The heavy, suffocating grayness that had clouded his skin since his first wife's passing was completely gone, replaced by a ruddy, vital warmth born of purpose and late-stage fatherhood. Mary stood by the porch railing, holding a tray with 2 tall glasses of iced lemonade. She wore a simple white linen dress, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. The dark circles that had once hollowed her eyes were entirely washed away, replaced by a quiet, radiant serenity. She set the tray down on a small side table and sat on the wooden bench next to Peter, resting her head gently against his sturdy shoulder. He looks just like you when he sleeps, Mary whispered, her fingers reaching over to softly stroke the baby's fine, dark hair. God help him if he inherits my stubbornness. Peter chuckled softly, his deep voice vibrating against her cheek. He shifted slightly, pulling Mary closer into his side, his arm wrapping around her shoulders with a protective, grounding weight. From the driveway below, the mail carrier's truck pulled away, leaving a small stack of letters in the mailbox. Mary walked down the stone steps to retrieve them, flipping through the utility bills and architectural updates for the inner-city housing project until she reached a thick, formal manila envelope addressed from a bankruptcy court downtown. She opened it on her way back up the steps. It was a legal notification regarding the final liquidation of Jason and Chloe's assets. The venture capital firm had collapsed entirely under the weight of their debt, and their luxury high-rise condo had been repossessed by the bank. There was no anger in Mary's chest as she read the legal jargon, only a profound, solemn pity. They had chased a phantom of wealth so aggressively that they had starved themselves of the only things that truly mattered. She quietly slid the document back into the envelope and set it on the table, choosing not to disturb the peaceful afternoon with the remnants of a broken past. Peter noticed, but he didn't ask. He didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer a void. It was an understanding. The community center opened its doors this morning, Peter said, looking out over the private lake as the sun began its slow, golden descent behind the trees. The director called me. She said 50 kids from the neighborhood showed up for the first woodworking class. They're using the old tools I donated from the garage. Mary smiled, her eyes glistening with a sudden, overwhelming warmth. She leaned over and kissed Peter's cheek, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. You built that for them, Peter. You gave them a place to belong. No, Mary, Peter said, turning his head to look directly into her eyes, his expression filled with an intensity of emotion that made her throat tighten. We built it. If you hadn't broken down in that dining room a year ago, if you hadn't chosen your honesty over their money, my heart would have stopped on that study floor. You didn't just save my life, child. You gave me a reason to keep building. He looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms, whose tiny fingers had instinctively closed around Peter's thick, callous thumb. The story of the Vance family was no longer a ledger of debts, betrayals, and inherited fortunes. It had been rewritten in the quiet, unyielding language of genuine human connection. True family wasn't determined by bloodlines or legal claims. It was forged in the moments when one human being looked at another's vulnerability and chose protection over exploitation. As the twilight deepened over Oak Ridge, painting the sky in soft shades of amber and violet, Mary leaned back into her husband's embrace. The banks had been paid, the secrets had been cleared, and the foundation they stood upon was finally, undeniably rock solid. Greed had eventually starved itself out in the cold, but inside the warmth of the craftsman home, love was busy building something that would last for generations.